everybody. I'm Jane Anson from janeanson.com, and I'm super happy to be joining Will Berliner of Cloudburst. Hi, Will. How are you?
Awesome. So good to see you.
You too. So, of all of the wines that I taste regularly and love, but have never actually visited, I think Cloudburst is at the top of my list of places that I desperately want to see for real. So could you just start off by setting the scene for us a little bit? You capture a sense of place in your glass. You really do. That makes me feel like I've been there. But can you just tell us a little bit about the setting, where you are, and how the vines sit with the bigger environment?
Yes. So I brought a map. So have a look at this. Here's Australia. Okay, so this is the Australia you know, and this is the Indian Ocean. And where the Indian Ocean meets the Southern Ocean is a little peninsula. Can you see that?
I can
Okay.
see the peninsula.
That peninsula is the Margaret River Peninsula. It's about 100 kilometers in length, and it connects to a larger region of very, very ancient lands that have not been conquered or changed by man to a great extent. So this is considered one of the biodiversity hotspots by the United Nations. It's the only one in Australia. So what this area is like is it's kind of when Gondwana land split from Pangaea millennia ago. This has remained unchanged. And our particular land is connected through bush. Think wilderness. The word for wilderness here is bush. Through bush to the national park, which runs the length of this peninsula. So you've got this isolated region, kind of like very far away from anything you can imagine. And you've got these animals and plants in great diversity, extending for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. And Cloudburst is this farm that basically consists of a few paddocks that were cleared by ring-barking trees and grazing animals by immigrants who did not have money for chemical fertilizer and chemical pesticides. So you have this region that's very wild, quite pristine, quite different, and then you have this farm with a few cleared fields, and I bought that farm. Most of the farm is bush, connecting to bush, to the ocean, which is right over there. You would be able to hear it if we set it up differently. So the ocean is right here. We're surrounded by water. It is a peninsula. The Indian Ocean is rugged. The Southern Ocean even more rugged than that. It's extremely isolated. There's no pollution. There's no industry. And you've got Cloudburst in that setting. And when I came to these lands, I had spent my life in the northeast of the US and in various territories around the US and Mexico. And my background is in the eastern deciduous forests, which look a little bit like your forests or a lot like your forests in temperate Europe. And down here, it's quite different. It's really dry. You have eucalypts and other kinds of plants that look like they're out of Dr. Seuss. And the ground is quite different, except when you're in the forests. And when I first looked at how agriculture was practiced here, basically by tractor, basically European or US in nature, that is, chemical, conventional inputs and scientific, I was kind of horrified because I felt that it wasn't paying attention to the fact that the place was so dry. Imported methods of thinking about how to raise plants has done a lot of ruin to this land. So you had this land that was cared for many, many years, and there was agriculture for tens of thousands of years. When the Europeans came, their way of sheep farming and so forth changed all of that dramatically. Within 10 or 20 years of contact, all of what had been created over those years changed. And there was the result, there are a lot of results, most of it devastating. And to continue that, even organic farmers have been farming conventionally with good, or let's call them, I call them good inputs. But it's the same thing that's been going on for many, many years. So I came here and I looked at that and I said, well, I don't really want to rip open the land and expose what little microorganisms are in that land to the sun to only be to kill them. I want to create life. And the way I came about that, the way I ended up doing this is that I created a close planted vineyard on its own roots because we
10,000
don't
vines per hectare. Yep, which means,
10,000.
yeah.
That's right, 10,000 vines per hectare, own rooted because we don't have phylloxera,
Yeah. So it's
non-irrigated.
entirely ungrafted. The entire vineyard is ungrafted.
It's totally ungrafted. And it's also never been watered, never been fertilized, never been cultivated. Essentially, what I do is I take a cutting, I poke a hole in the ground, I tamp the cutting in the ground, and then wait. And
Okay.
nature takes over, and that's how I grew the vineyard. I also didn't put treated pine posts and what. Go
I was
ahead.
gonna, we need to do a full podcast on this because there is so much to say
There's so
about
much.
this incredible place. But I'm bringing you back, Will. I am bringing you back
Okay,
to the
bring it
wine
back.
we are releasing this year.
We're releasing wine.
Okay, now everybody knows why your wine is so great, because you're just so passionate about what you do and you make such amazing things. So last time we met, we were sat on a train from Bordeaux to Paris. We had bread, we had baguette, we had cheese, and we had some Chardonnay. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about now, your 2019 Chardonnay.
Okay, should I pour that stuff or are we just talking? I have
And I
it.
tasted it. I wrote about it, joyful Chardonnay, and that is really, really how it makes me feel. So could you just tell us a little bit about the growing conditions for the 2019, which is the one that's
Sure.
just come out?
Sure. 2019 was the most challenging in my very short career. We began with a frost, which took very young buds, and this is common elsewhere, but a frost here is virtually unheard of. Winter here, compared to the winters in Europe, is, well, let's call it a joke to be kind. It might get to 45 or whatever. It doesn't get to freezing here, except it did that time. And so we lost a fair bit of our crop to begin with. And then on top of that, the conditions were such that, well, normally here we have these blossoms in the trees and the birds feed on those blossoms. But that year we didn't have any blossoms at all. And the birds were starving. And we're talking huge flocks of birds. It's not, when you think of a flock of bird here you're talking about hundreds of birds, not a few birds. And they were looking for the available food, and they saw it in the fruit of the vineyard. And
Yeah.
so, although the vines were netted, my task in 2019 was pretty much I'd wake up in the morning and I'd chase birds out of the nets and repair the nets. And then I'd go back to the same net that I had repaired earlier and chase them out again and repair the nets because they were so hungry they would dive bomb the nets. One bird would open it up for the rest of the others and they'd all would come in. And it was pretty full on. It was
Well, thank
really,
goodness you saved some grapes.
no, because we had a little to begin with, and then when the birds did get in there, once they start pecking at those grapes, they start fermenting, and that's it.
Yeah.
So we were able to preserve very little. But the quality of the grapes that we did preserve in that extremely dry kind of extended time had a taste like you wouldn't believe. And I found with that particular one, the way I wanted to approach it was to give it oak. Now I know that this is counterintuitive and or counter popular, nature, but I felt that it deserved oak, and I gave it full oak. It had full 100% new French oak, and what developed out of this was this kind of big, delicious, brioche, I don't know, cashewed kind of flavor,
Yeah.
which I've never
With
seen.
the energy that you always somehow capture in the glass.
Well, it's partially due to picking, and it's partially due to lack of sulfuring, because I think sulfur dampens down that energy. Sulfur is important, and I might be on the um, dangerous edge of not using a lot of it. But I think that as I get more skillful, especially in delivering oxygen to the ferment, I'm finding that the sulfur need tends to be less than what science tells us we're supposed
You're
to have.
pre-protecting a little bit.
Must protect a little bit, you
No,
know,
but I
and
mean, by letting oxygen in during the ferment, you're kind of pre-protecting against some of the oxidation. You're kind of,
I think that's true. But it's not just oxidation. You want microbial stability, and that's one of the questions of dancing this edge. Just like when we get into talking about the vineyard someday, there are edges I'm dealing with that some people would go, well, that's questionable, or that's unsound, as as they would say about Kurtz. That is the unsound. His practices are unsound. They are unsound. I know they're unsound.
but they work.
But they're working for me. And I guess for the people who have fallen in love with the wine, it's working for them. It's
It's
working
working.
for all of us. So,
Well, let's go on to the Cabernet Sauvignon and the Malbec. And in fact, the first year that you chose to put Malbec through the press as well. And this is not the 2019. We're talking 2018 now. So how different was that growing season?
2018 was a wetter season, and it also was a colder season. There was a lot of overcast for us. It allowed for hang time, if you will, but it was also kind of excruciatingly difficult in a different way. I I hate using the idea difficult because like there's this joyous thing about it all, and but there are challenges, and that was a challenge was that the extent of time and the lack of heat in comparison to typically hot whatever. I mean, I think most people will say that Margaret River's 2018 was a great vintage. There's no doubt it was a great vintage, but its challenge was not birds. There were Mary blossoms all over the place. The birds had no interest whatsoever. That wasn't what the challenge was. Um, the Cabernet, yes, it had full French oak again, but I do that. I've always done that with the Cabernet. It eats it up. I don't think that you would say that the wine is oaky, but it has oak influences, and that's what I'm aiming for with it.
Yep. Well, they were beautiful, both of those wines. And I thought that the Malbec, again, it's your ability to get the purity of expression of the fruit that you get in all of your wines. And I thought that the Malbec is just, I think it's going to surprise a lot of people, just how the clarity of the flavors. Oh, it's really, it's beautiful. So I think
Okay.
we're going to finish up just by saying we've spoken a little bit about you don't use so much SO2 and obviously biodynamic. Um, would you label your wines natural wines? Do you want people to think of them as natural wines? Is that, or is that not, doesn't it even enter your
Well,
lexicon?
I it's in the lexicon, of course, but not mine. um, if natural means non-manipulated, then I would say that, if it's trying to reflect something that's truer, great. I think of the wine as alive, and I want to respect it as being alive, so I don't really want to dampen it. Many people get like a couple steps back from their vines and they go, oh, there's this problem. We better hit it with this. And I look at it like, well, I don't want to hit it with anything. You know, it's a very different approach. So, for example, right now everyone is out there baiting snails or spraying for snails or doing all these things. I have some snails. I take the snails off. I don't want to bathe the vine in something to handle this thing that, lives there, but maybe we have too much of it. Maybe it's going to get in the way. So that's a very different approach. So with sulfur, or with natural, I think that as a category, it's brought in a lot of interest, but sometimes Well, I don't know whether natural and fine wine are the same thing, except sometimes. I'm not aiming for that. I'm aiming for wine that's alive, that really expresses the joy and the verve of the place. And you know, if it means that I'm using less sulfur, I'm not doing it because I want to be natural. I want it because I find that sulfur will just close it down a little bit. And it's a fine line because, in certain ferments, I look at it as all these things are possible that can happen. And some of those things could end up with off flavors and off odors, and we don't want those. But if we put too much sulfur, the kind of thing that happens that allows something amazing to happen doesn't. And I don't want to risk it. So I'm on this fine edge. And what I found is that there's like this range that the science says, and I find I've always been on the low end of the range and it hasn't been an issue. And sometimes I'm dipping below that range of what's supposed to be, not because I have some conceptual idea of we better hit this number, but because the wine is saying it. And that sounds really like arrogant, like I can listen to the wine, but it's just like you can, or you can taste something, if you're open to it, if you're not too stressed out and thinking about other things, and you're actually tasting where it's going, you can go, this is okay, or you know what, this is like on the edge of that.
Well,
And
I think
yeah,
what this is telling me that if you have to pick one word to sum up your approach as a winemaker, for me it would be intuitive. You're listening to what your own reaction to how you feel is happening in the vineyard and in the cellar, and making your choices from that, and not from anything that's prescribed from the outside. So I'm thinking people who are listening to this, we've talked longer than we definitely should have done, but I
of
think
course.
what this is going to make people think is these are interesting wines from somebody who cares deeply about what he's doing, and I'm certain this is going to make people want to discover them. So thank you so much, Will. That was
Yeah.
brilliant. I'm Jane Anson, speaking to Will Berliner.